that's fine.
I'm just going to press record. So,
Yes.
everyone, this is Kerrie, but I've just pressed record because we were just talking about stages of life, and I just think that this is so important to share. So I don't know, Kerrie, can you repeat? I'm sorry to ask, but can you repeat yourself about those 3 stages of life that we were just talking about?
I feel like my life's gone in 3 stages. I'm in my 60s now. The first stage of my life was getting married, having a family, which I loved, you know, raising the children. Then from that stage, I went to being single, grown-up children, living on my own, traveling the world solo, moving overseas. And now this third stage, I'm back in Melbourne. I see a lot of my family. It's just different stages. I don't feel that one stage was better than the other.
Yeah.
It's just, they're just different. And they're as enjoyable as each other. You know, I loved being a mum and having kids, and I loved traveling the world and living overseas and being a gypsy. My mum says, "You're a bloody gypsy." You know, and now that I've actually got a forever home, it doesn't mean I won't travel.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that part of me, you know, won't go away, but I'm kind of settled again and loving being a nana and have 7 beautiful grandchildren and 3 beautiful children. So it's just life stages, and they're different. Just that mine haven't been normal, but what is normal, you know?
Well, that's exactly it. And I'm just wondering, like, have you noticed in yourself when you, I don't know, have you got friends that have lived a bit more of a regular life?
Yes.
So have you noticed, I suppose, a difference in the way that you respond to situations and the way that you are resilient and open-minded in comparison to maybe them? Or not that you're better, but just you're different. Yeah, I would imagine that
have a different mindset. And I'm okay now, but when I first kind of integrated back into normal society, I found I didn't, you know, I couldn't stand, everyone's always busy all the time and, you know, can't do this and can't do that, and rules and regulations, because I lived where there really weren't any rules and regulations, and so, it's just your mindset. I felt for a long time I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't belong where I lived in Bali for 14 years. I didn't belong there anymore because that changed. I didn't belong here anymore in Melbourne because I had a different mindset. So it was just, that was the hard, not belonging or not feeling like you belong anywhere is quite difficult. And I've had friends, you know, who have struggled with the same. It's not a struggle, it's just a big adjustment.
Yeah.
You know, kind of fit in to what is most people's normality, which is not necessarily your normality. You know, my normality was being on a bus in Central America for 6 months, you know, that was my norm. Or, you know, even things like driving backwards and forwards to where I lived in Queensland. It would take me 4 days to drive. I thought nothing of it. Other women would never do that. It's like, no, there's me and my dog, off we go again. You know, driving on my own for 4 days. Like, whatever.
So what do you think helped you adjust coming back to Melbourne? Because you're fairly settled now back here, like you said, like even though you want to, you'll still continue traveling, you know, what do you think, was it just the consistent, you know, making sure that you showed up, and what was it that you think helped you readjust back into this life a bit more and start to feel like you belonged back in Melbourne?
Well, it kind of happened really when I first kind of was spending more time in Melbourne. My daughter Brooke and I rented a house in St Kilda. And I was only there for 4 months a year. You know, I'd come for a couple of weeks and then go, and then come for a month and go. So that went on for a while, quite a few years actually. So I still had a house in Bali and I had a place in Melbourne. So it was more of a slower integration and coming back. And, you know, I've still got a couple of really good friends, but most of my friends are all overseas. You know, we all met, we all lived in Bali. We all, you know, there's Melanie in Amsterdam, there's Celeste in Istanbul, there's Yasmin in England, you know, Alexandra in Dallas. So I'm kind of blessed that I have these friends all over the world, but I still have, you know, just a couple of core friends in Melbourne. And of course my family grew and my children had children, and so I think if you've got, well, Mum was sick. I kind of came back. Mum was sick, and I stayed with her for 6 weeks. Was it not last year, the year before? Yeah, I stayed with her for 6 weeks, and then I had a house sit for a month, so I was here for that period of time, and then I went back. We were living in Queensland at the time, and then I went back, and then I came back and decided that, you know, we wanted to move back to Melbourne. So I was lucky that I found a house that was about Christmas time or January that wasn't available until March. So it gave us time, well, for me to go back to Queensland to settle, and then, you know, well, things change and that didn't quite happen, but I still came back to Melbourne and moved into that house, and here I am.
It's funny because as you're talking, I'm thinking back to when I initially moved overseas and came back, and I was a lot younger, but I had this feeling of not belonging for quite a while, because whilst I was away traveling, all of my friends had gone off and bought houses and got engaged and kind of were starting to make a life for themselves here in Melbourne. And I came back with no money, huge credit card debt, pretty much like, you know, almost feeling like I just finished high school and had to like start. But interestingly, the grass is always greener. Like they're always saying to me, I wish that I had traveled Europe and America with a backpack like you did and no money, and, you know, because I wanted to experience that. And so it's almost like, that feeling of wanting to belong again, but also knowing that what you've experienced has been such a blessing. And
but the thing is, I did it the other way, because I was married at 19. I had the twin daughters at 23, my son at 25. So when my marriage ended, and I was only in my mid-40s. So, you know, that's the difference between the 70s and, you know, the 21st century, is people are waiting longer to have their children, whereas it was different. You know, things change. Life changes. You know, my mum used to think I would be better off just having a Monday to Friday job and not getting around everywhere, but it wasn't the life that I chose in the second stage of my life. It wasn't what I wanted to do. It doesn't mean it was a good thing or a bad thing, you know, but Mum couldn't understand that, but why you wouldn't want to work at 9 to 5 Monday to Friday and, you know, have a mortgage and
I feel like my mum struggled with that with me a little bit too, because she just felt that she didn't, I suppose she just didn't want to see me not succeed. So I think she struggled a little bit with a lot of the travel I initially did to begin with.
I was the opposite. I encouraged my girls.
That's right.
And when Brooke went first, she was 20, off, you know, had a job in England, and off she went. And my philosophy's always been, if it doesn't work out, you just come back.
Exactly.
I mean, what's the big deal? You know, I mean, just come back.
I couldn't, I really actually, because people always say to me all the time, oh, your ex-husband is English. Are you worried about Kobe going back over to England? And I suppose it helps that I love my ex-in-laws to bits. Like, I still call them my dad. But I'm just like, I hope he goes. I hope he goes.
Yeah.
Like that to me would be amazing. And of course I don't want to not see him ever again. And of course I'd love for him to eventually settle back where I'm at. But look, at the end of the day, we're in this new world where it's actually a much smaller world, and it's not that, I don't know, I just think you want that for your child. You want them to have that opportunity to see the world in a very different perspective.
Well, experience different cultures, different, we kind of are in the circle of here of, everyone being kind of on a level pegging, whereas you travel and you go overseas and you see these places and you think, oh God, we're lucky. We're so lucky.
Yeah.
And even in big cities like Paris, there's the slums when you catch the train from the airport into Paris, and it's like, wow, people live in those little shacks by the side of the road. In a big city like that, it's people live in phone boxes in the main streets, and it is. It's
Totally.
a great learning experience.
Even I look at my friends that are in good situations back in England, and I still think, gosh, if you came to Australia, you'd have such a better life. Because even though they're actually earning fairly good amount, they've got good careers, they're well housed, they're actually paying like triple what we're paying, and I don't know, I just think we actually are really lucky in this country to, in very different ways.
But I think we're different. We have a different mentality in Australia, guys. It's my dog, sorry. We have a different mentality. Like, my husband was English, and you go to England and they wouldn't, like, we think nothing of driving down the coast an hour and a half to have lunch and coming back. Oh, they don't do that over there. Oh, no. Goodness me. No.
It's like almost traveling overseas.
It's just crazy. And, and Richard really changed when he came here. It's like we would just go off, drive down somewhere, and he said, I really like driving in Australia because the roads are wide and, you can just go and, but it's just a different life. But I think our cost of living is super expensive. Like in England, you can go to Tesco or that, and you can pick up things for 50p or £1 or something, like a meal. You can't do that here. It's impossible. It's impossible.
That's true. That is a very different,
Yeah, I saw something. Yeah, what did I see yesterday that was ridiculously expensive? And, just so expensive.
Yeah.
Thank God I don't eat meat. That's all I can say. Thank God I don't eat meat. Who can afford to eat meat?
It's getting so expensive. So I know we initially talked about actually talking about mental health. So can I go back to, I suppose, let's maybe talk about your own experience with mental health. And I know you've talked a little bit about Richard, your second husband. And just, I obviously know the story around that, but if you want to maybe share for you how you met and what came of that.
Well, I had my own mental health issues back 2002. So I'm probably aware. I'd been with my first husband, for 28 years, and decided that that wasn't what I wanted, where I wanted to be anymore. So I left and struggled with mental health issues. After that, was suffering from depression. So I went and saw the doctor, and I took antidepressants, and I went to see a psychologist for 9 months. And what it turned out was my life as I'd known it was gone, and I was grieving, basically. Well, you're grieving. Yourself.
And it's so true, even though, because I was kind of in the same situation, I'm kind of the one that left my first marriage, but I think people assume because you left that you are going to be the one that's fine. And there's still that whole process of grieving, regardless of who. marriage and
Yeah.
left.
Well, I always say it's the biggest decision I've ever made in my life, you know, to leave after being with someone for 28 years. So, you know, it wasn't easy. It wasn't, you know, it was really hard.
Yeah.
It was hard, as you know.
Yeah.
I was in a different position to you because my children were grown up, well, basically grown up. I think Heath was, Teddy, stop it. Oh, he's only 4 months old, and of the other dog here, he's trying to get his attention. Teddy, don't be naughty. Yeah, so Heath was 17 and he went to live with his dad, and Taryn was going to England, and Brooke was already in England at that stage. So, you know, I didn't have young children. Stop it. It's worse than having children, I tell you, dogs. It's like, so, you know, and then, so I had 2002 was a really, you know, year for me of treatment. My belief is, you know, you can't just take an antidepressant to fix it. Depression is a chemical imbalance in your brain. So, you know, the antidepressants will stopped me crying all the time and made me think with a bit more clarity. But you've got to get to the root of the problem. So I don't think you can do one without the other. I think you need to combine antidepressants, and I only took a very low dose, just take the edge off, and then also therapy to you know, work out how you can make yourself feel better. So I did that for a long time. I think 9 months. I went to a psychologist in 2002, and then 2003 I took off and went to Bali just to take a year out. And of course that turned into 14 years. You know, as you do. Well, I just thought, well, you know, both the girls were in England, and Heath was with his dad, and it was like, well, what's to come back for? So I just made a life over there and a business and everything. But I met Richard online. He's English. He was in England, and in 2011. And we first physically met in Paris in January 2012.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's so
Yeah. So that was, we'd not actually met in person. So we met in Paris in 2012 and just hit it off, basically, and had a great time. And then I went to Mexico for a few months to live there in February, and Richard came, and then we decided, then I went to England in May that year, and then we decided to travel through the Middle East, and so it's just that all. And then he came to Australia for 3 months at the end of 2012 and went, but anyway, so it went over the years. And then in 2016 he decided to come and live in Australia, and I was virtually back by then. And so he came in February 2016, and Richard had always suffered from anxiety, and he was a musician, and he suffered terribly from anxiety. But what he drank, so he, you know, would always be the life of the party. So that alcohol, I never saw him drunk, you know, because I don't drink. So he never felt the need to drink around me. So, you know, he would just drink and kind of lose his inhibitions, I suppose, which is a bit of a contradiction because he was a musician who played in public. But if he knew that he had to play a gig the next day, he would not sleep the night before, or he'd have to take, you know, 5 sleeping pills to sleep, and then do a gig, and then he would be so mentally exhausted that he would have to lock himself away afterwards to just, you know, get back to being him. And he was you know, very intelligent and very talented, and everybody that met him liked him. But inside, he had this anxiety, and it was a social anxiety.
Yeah.
And, you know, he came.
Was it to do with his self-worth as a musician, or?
I think so. I think, yeah. Although he was very successful as a musician, so I think it was just a mental health issue and I think that the anxiety caused depression, or depression caused anxiety, and he didn't sleep, and if he didn't sleep well, he would you know, be in a state. Whereas for me, if I have 3 hours sleep, it's like, yeah, carry on as normal. But he wasn't like that. It was such a priority for him to sleep. And when we first moved, we're up in Byron Shire, northern New South Wales. We moved from Melbourne in August 2016, and we moved into a house that we were going to rent in November. And the first week, I think I was in Bali or something, and he broke his ankle the first week. Right. And it was amazing because it was the most beautiful property, 220 acres, top of, like, amazing. And all he could do was sit. And this misdiagnosis went on for 3 months, that it was sprained, it was fractured, it was broke, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so he would play computer games because he couldn't do anything. And then he wrecked his wrist, right? His right wrist, that he played with the mouse. And then, this is a long story, you know, this went on a couple of years.
I didn't know anything.
Yeah, so then he hated himself even more because he couldn't do anything. And so then when his ankle got better after 3 months, he went to work with his mate making didgeridoos, because Richard was one of the preeminent didge players in the world. So that was good. That, you know, made him feel like he was worthwhile and doing something, and he'd go off. But he got where he didn't want to see anybody. So when he knew that the people, it was on where a friend lived, they had a big workshop. When he knew the others were coming home, he would be gone. Like, he didn't want to see anybody. He just wanted to come home, go in the studio and just be with him, you know. And that was fine. You know, we always had breakfast together. We always had dinner together. But I knew he needed his alone time. And don't forget, I'd been on my own for 13 years. So I liked my time on my own, and he liked his time on his own. So, you know, we'd play a lot of Scrabble, and he always beat me, and, you know, Monopoly games like that, just to mix it up. And anyway, so he did that. And then we had to move out of that house because the owners were moving back in, and we kind of looked for somewhere else and couldn't find anywhere. So we kind of spontaneous said, well, let's go to Agnes Water, which is up in Queensland between Bundaberg and Gladstone. So we took off up there and went up there. And I think that, look, I don't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing in retrospect, because he became even more insular. Like, he had his mates that he would go and surf with and meet, but he would never socialise. He wouldn't want to go to the post office because we had to pick up mail. He wouldn't want to go to the supermarket. He'd never want to go out for dinner, or, you know, you'd have to drag him out kicking and screaming. So this social anxiety got worse and worse and worse. And then he would, so he was still playing. By this stage, he'd ruined his right wrist. It was ruined. He couldn't do anything. So he started these computer games with his left hand. Okay. So ultimately he ruined his left wrist. So he could not play music.
Wow.
A musician that couldn't play music, that's what made Richard Richard. Richard was a musician, and Richard couldn't be a musician. The only thing he could do was play a didgeridoo, because you don't need your hands.
Yeah.
So then started a long time of, you know, chiropractors, physios, hand therapy, doctors, specialists, you know, he just was useless. He felt absolutely useless. So the anxiety got worse and worse and worse and worse. And then depression got worse and worse and worse and worse. And he would just go downhill. And I never knew every day what mood he was going to be in when he came up those stairs. And I'm pretty tolerant. I'm pretty easygoing, you know, and as a lot of people with anxiety, and he would go on and on and on and on and on and on about it, you know, day after day. And I would have to offer the same advice. He would not seek help. He would not talk to anyone. He said, I've got anxiety, my nana had anxiety, and I've just got to live with it. But, you know, I would say to him, well, okay, you can't do anything about it. The anti-anxiety meds did not agree with him at all.
Yeah.
You know, learn to live with it, learn to manage it, learn what triggers it. He wouldn't have it. So, I felt like I did everything I could, you know, took him out because he couldn't drive because his wrists would hurt, you know, or for more than an hour. And so it just progressively got worse. And I got to the point where I would come down to Melbourne for a week or 2 weeks just for respite, because it wasn't good for my mental health as well. When you live with someone that's like that, it's very, very, it's difficult. It's draining. It's mentally draining, you know, when you try and you're as supportive as you can be, but it's draining. It's just exhausting. So, you know, so come for a walk, and even though you didn't feel like going for a walk, you'd go for a walk with him, you know, or come on, we're going out. We had like 1 million acres out the back, and every night we'd go out there, and I'm like, I'm really cooking dinner. Okay, let's go. So, you know, you be the supportive little wifey. And he just thought that he could fix himself by taking supplements and changing his diet. And of course it didn't work.
Where do you think that came from? That
research online. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, right.
Oh, you know, you've got to take niacin, or you've got to take all these natural therapies. And then, you know, he'd say, oh, okay, well, I want to change my diet, and I don't want to have any gluten or any sugar or any dairy or any meat. So then, you know, I was the one that would sit there and was reading recipe books like, okay, I've got to make something that doesn't have all this stuff in it. So I became quite inventive as a cook. So, yeah, and he was a good eater. So, you know, that was, he'd eat anything. So I did all that. And what happened when I came to Melbourne Christmas, New Year, and then 2000, was it? Yeah, 19.
Yeah,
and then, last year. And Ava and my granddaughter Ava, who was 10 at the time, she was going to drive back up to Queensland with me and my puppy, Gus, who was 3 or 4 months old. So we took off. Anyway, this story can be really long, but we ended up making it and had a lovely time. And, you know, Richard loved Ava and Ava loved Richard, and they'd go off without me, you know. They'd go off, we're going down the beach to look for turtles. Okay, bye, have fun. And then when I was coming back to Melbourne to bring Ava back, I was flying down. He was really down in the dumps when he dropped us off at the train station. We were taking the train to Brisbane and then flying from Brisbane, and he was really down in the dumps, like. And so I went to Melbourne. I was only going to be gone for 4 days. And when, you know, we sometimes didn't communicate a great deal when I was away, you know, and just a message. He'd write to me first thing in the morning or last thing at night when he went to bed, email, you know, because he hated talking on the phone even. And he'd say, oh, can you ring and make me an appointment at the doctor? What? You can't do it. You know, so this is what you had to put up with, is he didn't even want to make a phone call, didn't want to do anything like that involved anything. So it's hard to put the whole life into a short period of time. Anyway, so I came down to Melbourne, brought Ava back, and then I was flying back, and I didn't communicate much over that weekend. And I said to him on the Sunday, my flight arrives into Bundaberg at 5 p.m. Don't forget to pick me up.
Yeah.
And he was reading the messages but not responding. And a couple of his friends had, when was that? That must have been during the day on the Sunday, because apparently the night before he found this old bottle of cooking sherry in the cupboard, and there was an old bottle of gin, and he was drinking.
Right.
I hadn't drunk for 3.5 years. And so he was drinking, and he'd been emailing people in England, not anyone here in Australia, not myself or his other best mate Tristan, but people in England. I love, and all this stuff, which I didn't know. So I got a couple of emails in the morning saying, worried about Richard, he's been writing all these emails, and, what can we do? And of course, I tried to ring him, Tristan tried to ring him, couldn't get him. So Tristan rang the police.
Yeah.
And the police went round there in the morning, and Richard being Richard, they went in because the doors were always open, and they went in, and he was in bed, and he said, I just had a bad night, and, had a binge, and I'm fine. And the ambulance came, and I'm fine, everything's fine. And then a mate came around and sat with him. He said, look, I just want to sleep. So they left, and during the day I'd sent a couple of messages which he'd read, and he was with Gus, the puppy, right? I'd left Gus at home for a couple of days. That's the dog. And so I'd said to him, and I'd written to him, look, even people are trying to communicate. We just want to know you're okay. Please don't ignore people. Just, an emoji or something. And so that was all right. And so I said, don't forget, see you at 5 o'clock. So I flew to Bundaberg, got there at 5 o'clock. He's not there. So, of course, I'm angry. I'm thinking he's got a hangover and he's slept and forgot to pick me up. So I rang Brooke and I said, I'm really angry. And I rang Tristan and I said, he's not here. I'm really angry. Tried to ring him, message him, nothing. So after about 45 minutes, I thought, I'm going to have to rent a car and drive home, because it was an hour and a half drive.
Yes.
So I rented a car, and of course, as I'm driving, I'm angrier and angrier and getting really angry. And so I finally got home, and about 7 o'clock, I suppose, 7:30, and went in, and the light was on, the TV was on. We had a 3-story house, right? So you walk in on the top level. So I walked in, and I looked, and the light was on the balcony, the upstairs balcony, and there was a cup there and his vape, because he vaped, not smoked. And so, that's funny. And Ted was out on the balcony. Ted never went out on the balcony, but he came in. Not Ted, Gus, I beg your pardon. And he came in, and I was busting to go to the toilet. So I went downstairs and I looked in the bedroom, and he wasn't in bed. And I thought, wonder where he is. He must be down in the studio, which was on the lowest level. So I went to the toilet, and then I went down to the lowest level, which was his studio. And he just spent a lot of time there, because it was like the master bedroom that we converted into his music studio, and it had an ensuite and that. So he would go down there and do his thing, and it was perfect. And it had a balcony and on the lower level. So I went down there, and I thought, he must have gone for a walk. You know what things that go through your mind? He must have gone for a walk.
Yeah.
Funny, his thongs are there, and the dog's here. He wouldn't have gone for a walk without the dog. And and I didn't even kind of notice all the mess everywhere. It was a state. And anyway, So then I walked out onto the balcony and I saw him. He'd hung himself and was just hanging there. And it was just, well, words can't explain. Words can't explain what it's like to experience. Oh, I'm just grateful that he wasn't facing me.
Right.
So I just fell in a heap, fell in an absolute heap, went upstairs, rang the police. They were there I was still on the phone and they were there. And, you know, it's just, what do you do? You know, what do you do? And so they were there for a long time, and the police officer, you know, ultimately I think he kind of felt guilty in a way because he'd been there in the morning, and, you know, when other people had given statements, he was actually crying, you know, that he felt he failed Richard. But I don't think, if it hadn't have been then, it would have been, because he'd threatened it other times. When he broke his ankle, I was in Mexico for a while, and he'd threatened they were going to section him. I don't know what they call it in Australia. They were going to put him in a facility for people with mental illness, and he talked his way out of that. So it was the hardest and the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. And then you go through all the emotions of, you know, and I didn't know anyone in the town. We'd been there for 15 months and I had a friend, Katie, but Richard was my friend and I was his friend, but Katie was in Canada. So I stayed in the house until Brooke came, which was 3 days later. And, you know, I had to go give a statement at the police station. And, you know, it's
something you never think you're ever going to have to deal with, right? I mean,
no.
you're ever going to have to face that.
No, and then what happens is, for yourself, you're angry. How could he do this to me? You're sad because he's gone. You're guilty because what I could have done more. You're relieved because it was so hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all these emotions are going through your head that, you know, and then ultimately I know that he was at peace because he was tortured. He was a tortured soul, you know. He was only 43. He was just, he's at peace. And I think now I did everything I could. I could not have done more. I couldn't have done more. So he's at peace, but I was at peace, and I had to let the guilt go because, as I said, I did everything that I could, everything. Yeah. So it was to say it was a difficult period is probably an understatement. That, I would never wish it on my worst enemy, ever.
What have you done for yourself? Is there something that you've done for yourself in the last, since all of this has happened? And even, I mean, you've mentioned that that you would come down to Melbourne for respite because you needed to protect your own mind as well, which is really good. Is there anything that you've done that you think has really helped yourself in terms of coming to terms with everything that's going on? And obviously it's not that the journey is completely over for you, but it's more just, is there been something that you've done that's really kind of, I suppose, helped you not feel so overwhelmed by all the different emotions and really stay resilient for yourself and help you pull through?
Well, you know, I've been told that I'm very strong. You know, when I left my husband and I went through depression, it was like you're so strong, Kerrie. And I'm like, I'm not strong. I'm not strong. But I think I must be, because I think what had happened, because I'd arranged this house in Melbourne, I just wanted to get out of that house in Queensland as quickly as I could. So Brooke came down from the Wednesday to the Sunday, up. And then and of course I didn't even know where they'd taken him. The ambulance took him and I didn't know. Nobody told me where he was. And, after I think a week I found out where he was, and they had to take him to Brisbane to do an autopsy, and, but no one had told me. And so I had to find him, and then I had to arrange, cremation and how to get his ashes back to me. And, it was just a lot to do. But I think in a way, even though it was the saddest period, having to do all that kept me busy.
Yeah.
Having to pack up the house, having to arrange things, kept my mind focused. I'd arranged to have him cremated, and Taryn came up, and then I arranged a little, he only had a couple of mates Tristan came up from Byron Bay, and he was going to take all the musical instruments with him to send to his brother. So it was a busy period. It was a sad period, but it was also a busy period, and I think that was good.
Yeah.
And also, I had my dog, and I know that might sound like I'm a crazy dog lady.
No, not at all.
I had him to, I wasn't on my own, I suppose. Once
it's just such good therapy. They're actually used for therapy a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think Gus was that. Yeah, and so I had a month between leaving the house in Queensland and moving into the house in Melbourne. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of homeless, and I'd arranged a house sit in this period in near the border of New South Wales and Queensland, which was really good. So I took off and I spent a couple of days in Hervey Bay, and then I went down and I spent a couple of days somewhere else, and I eventually got down to my cousin's on the Gold Coast, stayed there one night, and then moved into another Airbnb, and then moved into the house sit. And I've got my cousin on the Gold Coast, and then I've got another good friend who lives up there. So I had them, and I had Gus, and we would go off and do things. And then from there I went down to another friend at Ballingen and stayed there, and, did a road trip. We road tripped.
Yeah.
Got to Melbourne, and I think I stayed with Brooke for a night, and then moved into the house and got everything shipped down. I had to arrange everything from storage, which, mind you, had been robbed, from storage down to Melbourne into the house on the day. So keeping busy is really important. Keeping focusing on other things. And I had a good support network of, and the people reaching out I couldn't talk to anyone for quite a while. I just felt if I had to talk to anyone, I would break down, and I couldn't do that. So I didn't really talk to anyone. And towards the end of the first week after he passed away, I sent out an email when Taryn was there. It must have been the second week, just, to say what had happened and kind of shed a bit of light, because people, stories get mixed up, they get convoluted and exaggerated, and so just to set the record straight, Richard had planned on going back to England, and I didn't want to go back and live in England, but he didn't want to do that, and he felt a burden to me. He'd say, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, all the time. He was so sorry, and I'm like, it's okay, so he felt he had no future back in England. He couldn't play music. He was supposed to have surgery. He didn't want to have surgery on his wrist, but that was the only resolution to fix, you know, like it was one thing on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, that it just became all too much for him.
Yep.
But, you know, I, as I said before, he's at peace, and I know he wasn't meant to stay in this world. No, he just wasn't. So, yeah.
You feel like your perspective on suicide has changed?
I think he was lucky that I kind of a lot of people don't understand mental health issues because it's not visible. Because I'd been through mental health issues myself and could understand it, people just would say, oh, just, you know, do this or just do that. And it's easy to say.
Oh, yeah.
It's really easy for people to offer advice, but you know, when you're in that position of having mental health issues, you just want to withdraw, and you wouldn't seek advice or help, or, you know.
And you have to feel like, myself, I've experienced issues, and I know for myself even, you have to be able to make that choice for yourself. You have to, get to that point where
absolutely
make that decision. You get to that fork in the road, and you know, I actually did get to that fork in the road at one point where I was like, you know, this is what my life is going to look like if I keep going down this path, and this is the alternative. And it takes work to go down there when you've been feeling so down for so long. I always even say now, like, it's much easier for me to recoil, go back into that low state. It's much harder for me to go into a higher state. You have to choose to go into a different state of being. And
I think you have to, when you get to the point that you know you need help, that's a huge obstacle to overcome.
Oh, yeah.
You know, whereas Richard knew he needed help, but he wouldn't reach out.
Yeah.
So he was lucky that I understood his issues. And, you know, tried to help as much as I can. But there's only, you know, I'd say to him, call Beyond Blue, call Lifeline, you know, talk to someone. But he just wouldn't. And it was like banging your head against a brick wall, because, you know, these people are there to help you, and reach out. And, you know, if anybody has mental health issues, reach out. People won't judge you. People understand that, you know, it's the silent killer. And you put on this facade, because I did myself when I was going through depression. You put on the facade that everything's fine, you know, and you probably did too, Nat. And then you go home and you sit in a dark room and cry.
Totally.
And you know, and people don't realise that how difficult it is. When you do, as I said, because you don't. It's not visible. Everyone felt sorry for Richard when he had his broken ankle and was on crutches, but no, he didn't tell anybody that he had such serious mental health problems.
Yeah, and I actually remember being really, when I was younger, not wanting to go onto antidepressants because I was worried about the stigma of that. This was back in my 20s, and I remember my mum actually saying to me, if you knew someone that had a heart disease or had cancer, would they be worried about taking medication for their treatment? So why, you know, so that was a real eye-opener for me, actually. And I say that to a lot of people now too, that, you know, when you're physically sick, you have no problems reaching for help. So you need to treat your mental health the same way.
But I think the thing is, when I first went to get antidepressants, when I went to see the doctor, when I knew I needed help, they started me on a low dose, 50 milligrams of Zoloft. So and then I had to go back to be reviewed a week or two later. And she said, we normally put you up to 100. I said, no, I don't want to. Look, I'm not crying all the time. I can still, you know, shed a tear in a sad movie. But I feel more grounded. So you don't have to take a higher dose. It's your decision.
That's right.
You don't.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think, oh, if the doctor says I should. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Totally.
If you're coping well on a lower dose, then stay with that lower dose.
Yeah.
And I did for, I think, probably 2 years.
Yeah.
And I just stopped taking it. And yeah, I think there is a stigma. You're right, Nat. There is a big stigma about taking antidepressants.
I think it's a lot. I definitely think it's gotten better now. Like, I think I'm quite vocal about the fact that I'm on antidepressants, and I've taken breaks, but I've always been back and forth on them. But I even have noticed, even in speaking to doctors now in comparison to when I was in my early 20s, because when I was in my early 20s and started on them, it was almost like this secret that you kept to yourself.
Yeah.
Even the way that the doctor would talk to you about it was different. Like, they'd be kind of like, it was almost like they didn't have the confidence, they didn't have the knowledge that they have now. And they actually never explained to me that you can't actually come off of them cold turkey either. You've got to actually wean yourself off.
Yes.
And he just kept upping my dose. And, you know, I'm sure at that point in time, it was just him and his own understanding as well, probably, and his own confidence in prescribing that to me. But, you know, I ended up coming off of them cold turkey because I was like, I'm fine. And then, oh, shit hit the fan, and I went down. I don't know if you remember that, but I ended up in hospital. And Taryn came straight down to hospital that day to be with me, actually. It was really bad. But I look back at that and I think, yeah, if you're seeing a doctor that you feel isn't giving you what you need, then you need to keep searching until you find the person that's willing to have the proper conversation with you, that knows their stuff. And I think nowadays it's actually a lot better. Like, I feel like I've worked with GPs and nurses now in the last few years, and I feel like there's much better understanding, much better kind of consultation process with patients around mental health and being prescribed medication. But, you know, and I've even said this to some of my clients who've not necessarily been happy with their psychologist, like, find someone else.
Exactly. I was just going to say that.
No one's going to be perfect for you, you know.
And people don't know you can get a mental health plan from your doctor. You know, ask your doctor, I need a mental health plan. And that cuts the fee. A lot of people are hesitant because of the financial cost of seeing a psychologist, but if you get a healthcare plan, it halves the fee. So there are benefits out there, and there are things you can do to help yourself.
But and you have choice.
Exactly. But you've got to get over that stigma. And I've always, like you, been quite open about, you know, the issues I have had with depression over the years, and so, you know, you can only try and help other people. I've got a very good friend.
I don't do it for sympathy. I do it more because I want to break down that barrier for other people. And
exactly.
Acting like it's quite normal. So then I can act like it's quite normal. You know, I wouldn't go around hiding the fact that, and maybe I would, I don't know, but if I got really sick with some sort of chronic disease, I wouldn't feel the need to keep that a secret necessarily.
Exactly. And it is an illness. It's an illness.
It is.
It's an illness.
Totally.
It's a, you know, legitimate illness. And, you know, it's not only anxiety and depression. I mean, there's lots of other mental health issues that people have that, I know Richard's father was schizophrenic. Right. So, you know, he ended up, you know, living in the park and dying in the park. Wow. So, you know, there's a lot of issues that went back to his mother. You know, he had issues with his mother, and it was just a lot of things.
And it is actually, it can be genetic too, because I know that for us in our family, it's genetic, and there's elements of it. So it's kind of almost this, and maybe that's why there is this stigma, because there is so much uncertainty about the fact that it's a chemical imbalance, but it's also your genes, but it's also your environment, and it's so many different things that snowball into this one outcome for you, and whether or not that kind of then makes it seem so much harder to explain to people, and therefore people don't feel comfortable talking about it. I don't know, but
Richard never did. He never really did speak to anyone, and they couldn't understand why he didn't want to, you know, go and play table tennis at the, you know, at the club with the guys he went surfing with. He didn't actually go surfing. He would never make a commitment to go. He'd say, "Oh, I'll see you down there." You know, he would never make a plan with anybody. So, you know, he would never even, he loved table tennis, you know. He said, "I can't play my wrist." And I went, "Oh, well, go and, you know, have a lime soda or something and have a chat."
Do you think, Richard, too, that it's because I know that there's obviously a lot of statistics show that it's much harder for men to reach out for help than women.
Yeah.
And majority of suicides, people that suicide are male.
Males, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think with Richard it was a lot to do with him being a male and his kind of the stigma around him reaching out for help as a male? As just no, you know what, this was just Richard. It wasn't really anything to do with his gender or, I mean, do you feel like it really had a lot to do with just his identity as a male that he didn't reach out for help?
I don't know whether it was because he was a male or just because of the way he was, you know. Yeah. And I think the big turning point for him was stopping drinking, you know. That was, and people couldn't understand. He used to get so very, very sick. He'd get this hangover and be in bed for 5 days, and he was probably killing himself that way with that. And then, you know, when he'd go to England and stay with a friend, he'd lock himself in the bedroom because he couldn't cope with all these people being around anymore, and because he wasn't drinking to join in, and so he felt he couldn't join in with them because he wasn't drinking. And then people would say, "Oh, why don't you have a drink?" You know, with that drinking mentality that people have, you know, it makes you feel like a freak because you're not drinking. I mean, I haven't drunk for 30 odd years, and you know, I'm silly enough as it is, but you know, you choose that. To me, drinking's not the be all and end all. And I you know, I don't know. Anyway, that's just me.
Yeah.
So reach out, anybody.
Yeah. And
reach out.
What advice would you have for someone who is living with someone, with a partner experiencing mental health issues? I mean, what's one piece of advice you would give to them?
Gosh, I tried everything.
Because I'd say there'd be lots of different things you could say, but is there anything in particular you would say is really important for them? I think you have to keep trying to get them to seek help. Yeah. You know, I tried. You know, I tried till I was blue in the face. I tried everything. And if they'll take that step, that's, you know, just be patient, be kind, and try to get them to seek help, because, you know, you can only do so much, and people need professional help, and they won't go. They won't go. Thank you.
As you said, I think it's a male thing, you know, because guys don't have mental health issues, you know. So, you're welcome, Nat.
Thank you so much for being so vulnerable and for sharing something that, I just really wanted to, I suppose, because I know I have people reaching out to me all the time around mental health, and I've had a few clients even that have been living with someone with mental health issues, and I just think that even though we don't have all the answers, it's just sometimes all you need is just to know that other people are in the same situation.
And also, like, for myself, I think, you know, in some ways I'm suffering PTSD because and I take antidepressants now again, but there's things that I notice about myself that weren't that are not the same as before. And I think it's, you know, when it's happened to you, it is a traumatic experience, and it's understandable that I could be suffering from PTSD, you know, so I have to look after myself too. So everybody look after yourselves.
That's it. Fill your own cup, right? It's so true.
Right.
You're not going to be able to be any good to anyone if aren't in a good space yourself. So,
but I also think don't feel pressured into things. You know, I'm a great one for the last however many years. Like, if I don't want to go, I don't go. I don't bullshit. You know, no, I don't really feel like it. But you go, but keep asking me, because one day I'll come.
yeah,
You know, just don't be a people pleaser. You know, please yourself and do what's best for you.
Yeah.
You know, not because you want to make other people happy. Like, if there's a big party and you don't want to go, don't go. They probably won't even notice you're not there.
So true. It's so true.
They won't notice if you leave early.
Yeah. We spend so much of our life trying to please other people, and the reality is that they probably don't even notice anyway.
Well, I'm the people pleaser antichrist. You know, I'm like the polar opposite. And that's another issue. You know, we could talk about. My mum always cared what other people thought. You know, what she dressed, what she wore, I don't give a crap, love. I don't know.
It's the best way to be.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I better get onto it. You're most welcome, Nat, anytime. More than happy to chat anytime about anything.
Yeah.